Remove my clothes if you can." The giant bride dared the lone rancher. He reached out, his hands shaking, and then he froze. The blood soaking the front of her wedding dress was still wet. It was still fresh. And it wasn't hers. Margaret Bull Sullivan had just beaten 3 men to death with her bare hands in the middle of the town square. Men who thought they could take what wasn't offered freely. Now she stood on the porch of Walter Hayes, the old rancher who'd watched the whole thing from his rocking chair and hadn't done a single damn thing. "Your turn, old man," she growled, her voice like rocks grinding together. "You've been wanting to see what's under this dress for years, so go on, take it off." But when his trembling fingers finally touched the delicate fabric of the first button, he whispered something that chilled her more than the desert night. "I know what you are. I know what you've been hiding all this time." His eyes, old and tired, stared at the stain on her dress. "That ain't monthly blood, girl. And those 3 in town? They weren't the first, were they?" The desert wind howled, carrying the coppery smell of iron and dust. It was the smell of vengeance. Margaret's chest rose and fell like a blacksmith's bellows. Every breath she took made the muscles under the white dress ripple and shift. She was 6'4" of pure, unadulterated rage, all wrapped up in her dead mother's wedding dress. And Walter Hayes, all 5'8" of sun-baked leather and quiet regret, stood frozen with his fingers on that first button. "Go on," she said, her voice dropping to a low thunder. "You've been watching me since I was 15 years old. Every Sunday at church your eyes would crawl all over me. Every harvest dance you stared like I was some prize heifer at the county fair." Her arms, as thick as solid oak fence posts, stayed crossed over her chest. "Well, here I am. No more watching from a distance. Take what you've always wanted to see." Walter's hands shook even harder. But it wasn't from fear. It was from a memory, buried deep for 20 long years. 20 years ago he'd found a woman out in the desert, a woman as tall as a cottonwood tree and as strong as 3 men, dying from a dozen bullet wounds. She'd begged him, with her last breath, to take her baby, hide the child, raise it as a human. And he'd promised. He had given his word, and he had kept that promise, until today. "Margaret," he said, his voice so soft it was almost lost in the wind. "Your mama, she wasn't from around here." Margaret took a step closer. The old wooden porch groaned and screamed under her weight. "What do you know about my mama? I know she came from up there." He pointed a gnarled finger at the sky, at the first stars just beginning to poke through the deep purple of dusk. "I know she bled silver instead of red, and I know she made me promise to keep you hidden, keep you safe, keep you normal." His voice cracked on that last word. "But normal girls don't shoot up 7 inches in a single summer. Normal girls don't take a horseshoe and bend it straight with their bare hands just because they're angry." Margaret's jaw clenched so tight he could hear the teeth grind. The blood on her dress was already turning a rusty brown in the dry heat. Those 3 men back in town. They'd cornered her behind the saloon. They'd said things, vile things. They'd tried things. And something inside her hadn't just snapped. It hadn't broken. It had awakened. She'd felt her bones grow denser, heavier. Her muscles had expanded, tearing the seams of her simple farm dress. Her skin had turned as hard as cured leather. And then she had torn them apart like they were nothing more than paper dolls. "You knew," she whispered, the words full of dawning horror. "All these years you knew what I was." "I knew what your mama was," he corrected. "I just hoped you'd be different. I hoped you'd stay small, stay quiet, stay human." Walter's eyes were wet now, glistening in the twilight. "But then you started growing. You started getting stronger, and you started looking exactly like her." The wind picked up, sending a family of tumbleweeds skittering across the ranch yard. In the distance, the horses in the corral were getting restless. They could smell it. Something was changing in the air, something electric and ancient and dangerous. Margaret's hand shot out and grabbed Walter's wrist. Her fingers, long and powerful, wrapped around his arm almost twice. "Those men today," she said, her voice flat. When I did that to them, you watched from this porch." I watched. "Why didn't you stop me?" "Because they deserved it." His voice was cold as a stone at the bottom of a well. "And because I knew it was starting." "What was starting?" Walter didn't answer. Instead, he pulled a folded, yellowed piece of paper from his vest pocket. His hands trembled as he unfolded it. It wasn't a wanted poster from any lawman on earth. The writing was in strange, sharp symbols that seemed to hurt your eyes just to look at them. The reward was listed in a currency that didn't exist on this planet. And the picture, the face staring out from the paper, was her mother's. "They're coming for you," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "The ones who killed your mama. They track your kind by your kills. And you, girl, you just lit up like a bonfire in the dead of night." Margaret's grip tightened on his wrist. Walter winced but didn't try to pull away. "My kind? What are you talking about?" "Your mama's people, the giants, the old blood, the ones who came before." He looked up at her face, and in the sharp lines of her jaw, the fierce light in her eyes, he saw her mother's terrible, magnificent beauty. "They hunt their own. The ones who run, who try to hide among us humans, who breed with us." "Breed," Margaret's voice was ice. "Is that what my father did? He just bred with her?" Walter shook his head fiercely. "No, your father loved her. He died protecting her. He died protecting you." He reached out with his free hand and touched the dark, crusted bloodstain on her dress. "This ain't the first time you've killed, is it?" Margaret's eyes went dark, like a storm gathering over the mountains. "No." "How many?" 17. The word hung in the air between them. Walter's breath hitched in his chest. "Since when?" "Since I was 12. 12. Walter felt the world spin. She'd been 12 when those two traveling salesmen had vanished without a trace on the edge of town. 12 when the sheriff's own bully of a son had supposedly fallen down that old dry well. 12 when half of the Colton gang, a pack of vicious outlaws, had disappeared during a full moon. "They hurt children," Margaret said, her voice simple and absolute, as if explaining the weather. "All of them. They hurt children, and I stopped them." "Your mama, she did the same thing," Walter whispered, a terrible understanding dawning on him. "That's why they hunted her. She couldn't stand to see the little ones suffer. And neither can you." His hand, no longer shaking, moved from the blood stain and went back to the first button of her dress. He undid it with a steady purpose. "We don't have much time." The button came undone, but underneath, it wasn't skin. Not exactly. It was something else. Something that shifted and shimmered between solid flesh and captured light. Something that belonged to the star-dusted sky, not the Texas dirt. "Why are you helping me?" Margaret asked, her voice losing its edge, replaced by a raw confusion. "Because I made a promise," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "And because I've been in love with you since the day you turned 18. The words fell out of him like heavy stones. "Not the way men love women? Not that cheap, easy thing? I love you the way a soldier loves a righteous war, the way a priest loves his God, the way a dying man loves one more sunrise." The second button came open. More of that strange, shifting skin was revealed. It looked like the desert horizon at high noon, all heat waves and mirages. "You're 73 years old, Walter," Margaret said, stating a fact. "And you're not human," he replied, stating another. "Guess that makes us both abominations." She let out a short, harsh laugh. It wasn't cruel, just tired. Bone tired. "So what now? You undress me on your porch and then what? We pretend this is all normal? Pretend I'm not some kind of monster who tears men to pieces?" "No." Walter's fingers found the third button. "Now, we get you ready. They'll be here by midnight. The hunters. The ones with silver blood and hearts as hard as yours. And they won't care that you're half human. To them, that just makes you pollution. Contamination. Let them come, she growled, the fire returning to her voice. You're strong, Margaret. Stronger than any of them probably think. His voice was firm now, full of a grim certainty. But they're older, they're meaner, and there's a hell of a lot more of them. She looked down at him then, this small, weathered old man who had watched her grow up from a distance. The man who had kept her impossible secret. The man who loved her in his own broken, terrible way. Then why are you still here? Why didn't you run? Because someone needs to teach you what your mama didn't have time to. He pulled the dress open wider, revealing more of her torso. The skin underneath was covered in intricate markings, swirling symbols that looked like a map written in pure genetics. These marks, they're not random, they're not birthmarks. He traced one with his finger. They're instructions, they're battle plans. Your mama carved them into your very DNA before you were even born. Margaret looked down at her own body, truly seeing it for the first time. The symbols were glowing now, a faint, silvery light that was getting brighter with every passing second. Instructions for what? Walter looked up, his old eyes filled with a terrible pride. For how to kill your own kind. The wind stopped. The horses in the corral went silent. Even the chirping of the crickets held its breath. My mama was a killer. Your mama was a general in a war that's been raging since before this earth even had a name, Walter said, stepping back to look at her fully. And you, Margaret Sullivan, you are her weapon. In the far distance, something howled. It wasn't the sound of a wolf or a coyote. It was a sound that had no name in any human language, a sound that tore at the very fabric of the night. Walter turned and grabbed his old rifle from its place beside the door. They're early. Margaret let the tattered wedding dress fall completely to the porch floor. Her body, fully revealed, was magnificent and terrifying. 7 feet of raw muscle and shifting starlight, covered in ancient scars and sacred geometry. She flexed her hands, and her skin seemed to harden, taking on the sheen of polished armor. Good, she said, her voice a low rumble. I'm done running from what I am. You never ran, Walter said, his hands moving with practiced speed as he loaded the rifle with silver bullets he'd been hiding, saving for 20 long years. You were just waiting to grow into it. Another howl ripped through the air. Closer now. Margaret could smell them. The scent was like copper and lightning, like the cold, empty space between the stars. She turned to Walter, her new, strange eyes locking onto his. After this is over, if we survive, what then? He smiled. It was the first real, genuine smile she had ever seen on his face. Then I teach you the rest. How to find the others like you. The half-breeds, the hidden ones, the other weapons just waiting to wake up. He chambered around. And then we take the war to them. The first hunter appeared on the distant horizon. It was 10 feet tall, and it moved like smoke given form. Margaret's blood, both human and not, sang in a terrible, ancient recognition. Enemy, old, hungry. She cracked her knuckles, and each pop sounded like a distant clap of thunder. One more thing, Walter said, his eyes on the approaching figure. What? Your real name. The name your mama gave you. It wasn't Margaret. What was it? He spoke a word that made the air itself shimmer and warp. A word older than the dirt beneath their feet. A word that meant, in a language of gods and monsters, the ending of things. Margaret smiled, and for the first time in her entire life, that smile reached her eyes. The hunters were here, and she was ready. The first hunter moved like water poured from a midnight sky. Its body wasn't solid, not yet. It shifted between shapes, a nightmare flicker book of forms. Sometimes it looked like a man, impossibly tall and thin. Sometimes it was a beast from a forgotten mythology, and sometimes it was just a collection of teeth and a deep, gnawing hunger, all wrapped in starlight. Margaret planted her feet in the hard-packed dirt of the yard, feeling the solid weight of the earth anchor her bones. The marks on her skin were burning brightly now, a living, silvery fire. Each symbol was a word, a command, in a language older than planets. Walter fired first. The silver bullet, a tiny speck of mortal hope, hit the hunter center mass and simply passed through it as if it were made of morning mist. "They're not physical yet," he shouted over the rising wind. "They're still traveling between." "Between what?" Margaret's voice had dropped 3 full octaves. It rumbled from a place deeper than her throat, a place of stone and gravity. "Between there and here! Between then and now!" He fired again, aiming for the spot where the creature's head kept trying to form. "Your mama taught me. They can only solidify for the kill." The hunter laughed. The sound was like breaking glass and crying babies, and the last rattling breath of a dying star. It spoke in that same impossible language that hurt human ears to hear, the language of her true name. But Margaret understood it now. The living marks on her skin were translating in real time. Abomination, it said. Halfling. Poison in the bloodline. "Yeah?" Margaret took a step forward. The ground cracked under her incredible weight. "Come say it a little closer." As if on cue, 3 more hunters appeared. They materialized out of the dusk, moving in a tight formation that spoke of rituals as ancient as the cosmos. One of them sniffed the air, its non-face contorting in disgust. She smells of them, of birth and meat and mortality. She smells of her father. Another one hissed, a sound like steam escaping a cracked boiler. The betrayer, the one who loved beneath his station. Margaret's hands clenched into fists the size of sledgehammers. "You knew my father." The lead hunter, the first one to arrive, finally solidified just enough to show its face. It was a thing of terrible, perfect beauty, like looking directly into the heart of the sun. "We executed him. Slowly. We made him watch as we hunted your mother across 9 star systems." The rage that slammed into Margaret wasn't human. It was older, deeper, a fury forged in the core of dying stars. Her body responded instantly, instinctively. It began to grow. 8 feet. 9. Her muscles expanded until the very fabric of reality seemed to strain around her. She stood naked and unashamed under the alien starlight, a giantess made of flesh and light and a righteous, cosmic fury. Walter stumbled back. "Margaret, don't let the anger control you. That's what they want." But she moved faster than thought. Her hand, now impossibly large, closed around the lead hunter's throat just as it finally became fully solid to strike her down. The moment her skin touched its skin, they both screamed. The contact burned, it sizzled, it sent jagged bolts of blue lightning cracking through the air. But she held on. "You!" Her voice was the thunder that follows the lightning. "You killed them!" The hunter clawed at her hand, its fingers like sharpened razors. They cut deep into her flesh, but her blood ran silver now too, and where it dripped and spattered on the ground, the desert sand fused into black, swirling glass. You shouldn't be able to touch me." The hunter gasped, its voice choked. "No halfling has this strength." She squeezed harder, feeling the alien bones begin to grind. "I'm not just any halfling." The marks on her skin were moving, flowing like mercury, rearranging themselves into new patterns, new battle formations. "I'm her daughter." For the first time, recognition flashed in the hunter's ancient eyes, and with it came real fear. "No, she's dead. We killed her. We killed the general." "You killed her body," Margaret said, lifting the hunter clean off the ground with one hand. It must have weighed 500 pounds, but in her grip it was as light as a child's doll. "But she put everything she was into me." The other 3 hunters attacked simultaneously. They came at her from all sides, a storm of claws and impossible light and angles that defied geometry. Walter kept firing, his silver bullets now blessed with something more than just metal. He was whispering words he'd learned from Margaret's mother, words of binding and making real, words that made his bullets solid enough to wound the star-born creatures. But Margaret didn't need his help. The marks on her skin were fully active now, a living lattice of combat knowledge turning her body into the ultimate weapon. Every move the hunters made, she had already seen in her mind's eye. Every feint, every strike, every impossible angle of attack. Her mother had taught her muscles how to counter it all before she was even born. She threw the first hunter into the second with enough force to create a sonic boom. She caught the third's arm as it tried to phase through her and simply tore it off at the shoulder. The fourth tried to dissolve back into smoke, to flee between dimensions, but she grabbed it anyway. Her hands were somehow solid in every reality at once. Impossible! It shrieked, its form flickering wildly. "My mother was your general for 10,000 years," Margaret said, her voice now carrying the weight and sorrow of all those millennia. "She learned every single one of your weaknesses, every flaw in your armor, every secret way to kill her own kind." She pulled the terrified hunter close, her face inches from its, her voice dropping to a whisper. "And she gave it all to me." The hunter's ancient eyes went wide with a dawning ultimate terror. "The prophecy. You are the prophecy." "What prophecy?" Walter called out, fumbling to reload his rifle with shaking hands. The hunter let out a laugh, a sound as bitter and cold as a winter wind. The general's revenge. She swore she would create a weapon that could end the great hunt. End the war. It stared at Margaret. We thought she meant a machine, a starship, a bomb. But she meant me, Margaret finished, her voice flat and final. She meant me. She dropped the hunter and turned to face the others. They were backing away now, truly, deeply afraid. These beings, these creatures that had existed since before the universe had a name, were afraid of a half-human girl from a backwater planet called Earth. "Run," she said simply. And they did. They dissolved into smoke and light and fled back toward the cold, indifferent stars. All except one, the one whose arm she'd torn off. It lay in the dirt, silver blood pooling beneath it, staring up at her with eyes older than time itself. "You don't understand," it wheezed, its voice fading. "If you kill us all, if you end the hunters, there's nothing left to keep them in check." "Them?" "The others. The ones we hunt. The ones like your mother who go native, who fall in love with lesser beings, who corrupt the bloodline." It coughed, a spray of silver liquid spattering across the sand. "We are not the villains of this story. We are the immune system." Margaret knelt beside the dying creature. Her body was still giant, still glowing with a faint internal starlight, but her face was almost gentle. "My mother didn't corrupt anything. She evolved." "Evolution is corruption," it gasped. "No." She placed her massive hand on its chest, staying the same forever, never changing, never growing. "That's the corruption." The hunter started to say something else, to plead or to curse, but Walter stepped forward and put a single, blessed silver bullet into its head. It ended instantly. Its body collapsed into a pile of dust that sparkled like a miniature galaxy before the desert wind took it away, scattering it across the plains. Margaret stood up slowly. Her body was already beginning to shrink, to recede, the immense power pulling back into her core. She settled back to her normal size, if 7 feet could ever be called normal. The glowing marks on her skin faded until they looked like intricate, ordinary birthmarks once again. She was naked, covered in shimmering silver blood and desert dust, and she was shaking, not from cold, but from the sheer, overwhelming release of a lifetime of suppressed power. Walter took off his worn canvas coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. It looked ridiculous on her, like putting a handkerchief on a horse. but she clutched it to her body anyway. "The prophecy," she said quietly, her voice her own again. "What do you think it really means?" "I think," Walter said, his eyes on the patch of glassy ground where her blood had fallen, "that your mother was playing a much longer game than anyone ever knew." He pointed. Already, strange, luminescent flowers were pushing their way up through the fused sand, flowers that had never existed on Earth before. "I think she didn't just want to end the hunters. I think she wanted to change what it means to be her species." He looked at her. "The hunter was right about one thing. Your mother wasn't the only one who went native. There are others, scattered across this planet, hidden, ashamed, afraid of what they are." He gently touched one of the fading marks on her shoulder. "But now they'll know it's possible. They'll know it's possible to fight back, to be both things at once." Margaret looked out at the horizon. The sun was setting for real now, painting the desert in brutal shades of blood and gold. "How many others?" "Maybe 100, maybe more. Your mother kept records, hid them in places only someone with her blood, someone like you, could ever find." "Someone like me," she tasted the words. "A weapon." "No." Walter's voice was firm, cutting through her doubt. A bridge between what they were and what they could all become." She was quiet for a long moment, the silence of the desert settling around them. "Those men I killed in town," she finally said. "I didn't mean to. Something just woke up inside me." "It was always awake," Walter said gently. "You just finally let it out of its cage." He started walking slowly toward the small ranch house. "Come on, we need to get you cleaned up, dressed, fed. You just burned through about 10,000 calories in 5 minutes." She followed him, her steps heavier than before, leaving deeper prints in the dirt. "Walter." "Yeah? You said you loved me, like a soldier loves a war." He stopped at the porch steps but didn't turn around. "I did. That's a terrible kind of love." "Yes," he said. "It is. But it's honest." He finally turned to face her. His weathered, leathery face was wet with tears, carving clean tracks through the dust on his cheeks. "It's the only kind of love I've got left in me, girl. You can take it or leave it." She reached out and took his small, gnarled hand in hers. Her palm swallowed his completely. "I'll take it," she said softly, "but I need to know something first." "What?" "My mother, when she was dying, right at the end, what were her last words?" Walter squeezed her hand as hard as his old bones would allow. She probably couldn't even feel it. She said, "Tell her she's not a mistake. Tell her she's the answer." "The answer to what?" He looked up at her, this impossible child of two worlds, standing under a sky that was now her birthright. "What happens when love is stronger than blood?" Margaret looked down at their joined hands. His, old and small and painfully human, hers, massive and still faintly sparking with otherworldly power. "And what's the answer?" "You are, Margaret," he whispered. "You're the answer." They walked into the little house as the first true stars appeared in the sky. But now Margaret knew they weren't just stars. They were eyes, watching, waiting, some in fear, and some, for the first time in millennia, in hope. The war wasn't over. It had just changed shape, and somewhere out in the dark desert, those strange new flowers kept growing, spreading seeds that would soon bloom into something the universe had never seen before. The small kitchen smelled like gunpowder, blood, and pinto beans. Margaret sat at the heavy oak table, a table that groaned and creaked under her weight, and she ate directly from a cast-iron pot meant to feed 10 hungry cowboys. Her body was a furnace, consuming everything, rebuilding itself, demanding payment in calories for the impossible power she had just unleashed. Walter stood at the stove, a whirlwind of motion, frying slabs of bacon, scrambling a dozen eggs at a time, opening can after can of anything he could get his hands on. "Slower," he said, not looking at her. "You'll make yourself sick." "Can't." The word came out as a strangled grunt between desperate swallows. "The hunger. It's like dying." "Your mother was the same after a fight," he said, a faint smile touching his lips. "She could eat a whole cow, raw." He slid another heaping plate in front of her. "Lucky for you, I learned to cook fast and in bulk." She paused for a second, a forkful of beans halfway to her mouth, and looked at him with new eyes. Truly looked at him. "You really knew her, my mother?" "Knew her? Girl, I pulled her out of the wreckage of my own barn," he said, leaning against the counter. 22 years ago. Crashed right through the roof. Thought it was a meteor at first. Went out to check and found a woman instead. 10 feet tall, bleeding silver all over my hay, and speaking in languages that made my teeth hurt. "Why didn't you run? Or shoot her?" "Because she was crying," he said simply. He walked over and sat across from her, his own small chair creaking in protest. Here was this being that could exist between the stars, that had probably lived for thousands of years, a creature that could treat us like we treat ants under a boot. And she was sobbing her heart out over a dead calf she'd landed on, said she'd taken an innocent life. Margaret's frantic eating slowed. "That's when you fell in love with her." "No," he said, shaking his head. "That's when I knew she was different from the others. That's when I knew she was worth saving." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a small, leather-bound book, its cover worn smooth from years of handling. "This was your mother's. She wrote in it every single day she was here. Wrote it in English so that one day you could read it." Margaret's massive hand, still stained with silver blood, trembled as she took the journal. It was tiny in her grip, a fragile thing from a world that no longer fit her. She opened it with a surgeon's care. The first entry was dated 23 years ago. The ink was faded, but the handwriting was elegant and precise. "The human has agreed to hide me. His name is Walter. He is 53 rotations around his star. By our standards, his life is already over. By his, he says he's just getting interesting." I find myself believing him. Margaret looked up, her eyes wide. "You were 50 when you met her?" 50, and ready to die," he said, getting up to start a fresh pot of coffee. "My wife had been gone for 10 years. My son was killed in the range wars. There was nothing left for me but this land and a whole lot of stubbornness." He looked out the window into the darkness. "Your mother, she gave me a reason to stay alive. She gave me a purpose." Margaret went back to the journal, her fingers turning the delicate pages. The first several entries were observations about Earth, about humans, about Walter himself. Her mother wrote like a brilliant scientist, studying a beautiful, fragile, and utterly baffling new life form. Then, the tone began to change. "The human male from the neighboring ranch has begun to visit daily. His name is Thomas Sullivan. He brings flowers, which I have learned are the severed reproductive organs of plants, presented as a token of affection. It is a barbaric and beautiful custom. I do not understand the ritual, but Walter seems agitated by it. When I asked why, he said, 'Because he's courting you, you damn fool.' I had to consult a dictionary for the word courting. The humans have hundreds of words for attraction, for bonding, for love. We have only one, breeding. But breeding implies a biological purpose. What Thomas offers seems to have no purpose at all, just wanting, just feeling. It is inefficient. It is illogical. It is wonderful." "My father," Margaret whispered the words. "Tom Sullivan," Walter said, bringing her a steaming mug of coffee, black and strong enough to float a horseshoe. "Best horse breeder in 3 states. Worst poker player in 5. He took one look at your mother and forgot his own name. Didn't care that she was 10 feet tall. Didn't care that she glowed faintly in the dark. Didn't care that she could bench press one of his prize stallions. Margaret turned more pages, reading faster now, devouring the story of her own beginning. Her mother's entries became more emotional, more human. She wrote about learning how to laugh, a sensation she described as a pleasant, involuntary spasming of the diaphragm. She wrote about discovering ice cream, which she believed to be proof that humans have a direct connection to the divine. She wrote about the first time Thomas kissed her, and how it made her feel like she was falling through space without moving an inch. Then, a new entry. I am pregnant. This should be impossible. Our species are not biologically compatible. But love, it seems, has its own biology. Walter says the child will be neither thing fully, but both things completely. He says it will be a lonely existence. I told him, aren't we all? Margaret's eyes burned, not with starlight power, but with simple, human tears. She wanted me, even knowing what I would be. She fought for you, Walter said, his voice thick with memory. When the hunters came the first time, she was 8 months pregnant with you. Could barely move. She still killed 6 of them before they wounded her and fled. He refilled her plate without being asked. That's when she knew they'd be back. That's when she started writing the marks into your DNA. A last gift, she called it. Margaret found the entry. Her mother's usually perfect handwriting was shaky, hurried. They will come for her. My daughter. My impossible girl. They will come because she is living proof that we can change, that we can be more than what we were made to be. I am writing our entire military history into her genetic code. Every battle technique, every weakness of our kind, every secret strategy. She will be born knowing how to destroy us. I pray to the nameless void that she never has to, and I pray even harder that if she does, she shows mercy. We don't deserve it. But perhaps that is exactly why we need it. The next entry was the last. It was shorter, the words stained with what looked like tears or silver blood. Thomas is dead. The hunters made him suffer, to punish me. Walter has promised to raise her, to keep her human for as long as he can. But I have learned that humanity isn't about a species. It's about a choice. The choice to love instead of hate, to build instead of destroy, to forgive instead of seek revenge. Thomas taught me that. I hope, somehow, through Walter. He teaches her too. Margaret closed the journal. Her whole body was shaking. She gave up everything for me. No, Walter said, his voice firm and strong. She gave up everything for the future. You're not just her daughter, Margaret. You are her revolution. A sound from outside made them both freeze. It wasn't the howl of a hunter. It was the sound of horses, many horses, and men's voices, angry and afraid. Margaret stood up, her head brushing the wooden beams of the ceiling. Who knows I'm here? Walter looked out the small kitchen window, and a string of curses fell from his lips. The whole damn town, apparently. They were coming with torches, even though the moon was bright. 20 men, maybe more, their faces grim and set. At their head rode Mayor Clemens, his white suit practically glowing in the dark, spotless, despite the desert dust. Beside him was the town sheriff, with both of his hands resting on the butts of his pistols. "Walter Hayes!" The mayor's voice boomed across the yard. "Send out the monster!" Margaret started for the door, a low growl building in her chest, but Walter blocked her with his thin arm. It was a useless gesture. She could have moved him like a piece of paper, but she stopped anyway. "Let me handle this," he said, his voice low. "They don't want you. They want someone to blame. For the fear, for the changes, for everything in their small lives. They don't understand." He grabbed his rifle from the wall. "Stay inside, please." She let him go, but she watched from the window as he stepped out onto the porch. The crowd was an ugly thing, a mix of fear and self-righteousness. She could hear their hearts beating too fast, a frantic drumming in the night. She could smell their sweat, their cheap whiskey, their excitement. They wanted violence. They wanted to feel powerful again in a world that was rapidly leaving them behind. "She killed 3 men, Walter!" the sheriff yelled. "She killed 3 rapists!" Walter yelled back. 3 scum who cornered a woman behind my saloon. Are you going to arrest her, or are you going to give her a medal? "She ain't no woman!" someone shouted from the back of the crowd. "She's an abomination, Satan's own bride." Walter let out a laugh, a sound as bitter and sharp as broken glass. "Satan? Boys, if you knew what was really out there in the dark, you'd be on your knees begging Satan for his protection." The mayor dismounted and strode forward, walking close enough that Margaret could see the dark sweat stains spreading under the arms of his pristine white suit. "We know what she is, Walter. We've always known there was something wrong with that girl. That thing you've been hiding. That creature that grew too big, too fast, too wrong. She's not a thing. Then what is she?" the mayor demanded. Walter was quiet for a long moment, looking at the faces in the crowd, faces he'd known his whole life. Then he said, "She's the future." The sheriff drew his gun. "Step aside, old man. No. We'll go through you if we have to. Then you better get started." Margaret couldn't watch anymore. She stood to her full height, the floorboards screaming under her weight, and she walked outside. The crowd took a collective step back as one, a visible wave of fear rippling through them. She was still wearing only Walter's coat, her long, powerful legs bare, her feet leaving deep prints in the hard-packed dirt. "Here I am," she said, her voice calm and clear, carrying easily over the nervous shuffling of the men and horses. "The monster, the abomination, the thing you came here to kill." The sheriff's gun shook in his hand as he aimed it at the center of her chest. "You're under arrest." "For what?" she asked, taking a slow step forward. "For defending myself? For being different? For being alive?" She took another step. Several horses reared and whinnied in terror. "Or is it just for making you all feel small?" "You killed 3 men!" the mayor blustered. "I did," she said without hesitation, "and if they were still here, I would do it again." She let the coat fall open slightly, showing the intricate, faded marks on her skin. "They wanted to take something that wasn't theirs to take, just like all of you are doing right now." The mayor finally found his voice. "You're not natural. You're not God's creation." "Neither is your pistol," she replied calmly, looking at the sheriff. "Or your fancy suit," she said to the mayor. "Or the whiskey on your breath. Nothing about your lives is natural. You just got used to your own brand of magic." She looked from man to man, her gaze piercing. "You came here to kill something you don't understand because it scares you. That isn't justice. That isn't righteousness. That's just plain, simple fear." Someone in the back of the mob, feeling brave in the crowd, threw a rock. It sailed through the air and hit her square on the shoulder. It bounced off with a dull thud, as if it had struck solid iron. She didn't even flinch. "I could kill every single one of you," she said, her voice dropping to a quiet, conversational tone. "Right now. It would be easy, like stepping on ants." She let that thought hang in the air, let it sink into their bones. "But I won't. Do you want to know why?" The silence was absolute. "Because my father was human, and he taught my mother something that she, in turn, taught me." She looked directly at the sheriff, at the man who was supposed to represent the law. "Mercy. Mercy is what makes us more than just animals, more than monsters, more than whatever it is you think I am." The sheriff's hand was shaking so badly now that he could barely hold the heavy pistol. What are you?" "I'm Margaret Sullivan," she said, her voice rising with each word. "I was born here. I grew up here. I've saved 6 of your children from drowning in the river over the years. I held Mrs. Patterson's hand for 3 days straight when she was dying of the fever. I helped you rebuild the church after the fire." Her voice boomed across the ranch yard now, full of power and truth. "I am your neighbor. I am your community. I am this town, whether you like it or not." A tiny, bent old woman pushed her way through the crowd of large, armed men. It was Mrs. Patterson's sister, Agnes. She was tiny, bent with age, but her eyes were as fierce as a badger's. She walked right up to the base of Margaret's towering form and looked straight up into her face. "You saved my grandnephew from that river," she said, her voice raspy but clear. "Yes, ma'am," Margaret replied softly. "You stayed with my sister when the doc said there was nothing more to be done." "Yes, ma'am." Agnes turned her fierce gaze on the crowd. "Any of you boys lays a hand on this girl, you'll answer to me." And just like that, the spell was broken. The sheriff slowly, hesitantly, lowered his gun. The mayor took a step back, suddenly looking foolish and sweaty in his white suit. The crowd began to dissolve. Men started mumbling, avoiding eye contact, suddenly finding very important reasons to be heading home. But one of them stayed. A young man, maybe 20 years old, with the kind of soft, unlined face that had never known a day of real hardship. He just stood there, staring at Margaret, and the look on his face wasn't fear or disgust or anger. It was pure, unadulterated wonder. "You're beautiful," he said. Everyone who was left froze. Margaret looked down at him. She really looked at him, and saw the simple, unwavering honesty in his eyes, the complete lack of fear, the plain truth of what he felt. "No," she said gently. "I'm necessary." The young man smiled, a dazzling, hopeful thing. "Can't you be both?" Before she could even think of an answer, the ground shook. Not like an earthquake. This was different. This was the feeling of something immense landing nearby. Something heavy. The horses went mad, bucking and screaming, running off into the desert. The last remaining members of the crowd scattered, yelling in terror. Another hunter. But this one was different. It was smaller, more human-shaped. It stood at the edge of the ranch property, just watching, waiting. Margaret instinctively stepped forward, her body tensing, preparing for another fight. But the hunter raised a single open hand, the universal gesture for peace. "I am not here to fight," it said, and its voice, though alien, was almost human, almost kind. "I am here to join you." Margaret's marks flared with a silvery light. "Join me?" The hunter pulled back the hood of its strange, dark cloak. Its face was scarred, twisted from some old battle, but its eyes were clear and intelligent. "Your mother was not the only one who believed our people needed to change. She had followers, allies. We have been hidden, waiting for a sign." It looked at her with a profound respect. "And now that you have proven it is possible to be both, to be the bridge, we are ready to follow you." "Follow me where?" "Forward," the hunter said, a strange hope in its alien voice. "Into something new. Into evolution." Margaret looked back at the ranch house, at Walter standing on the porch with his rifle. She looked at old, fierce Agnes. She looked at the young man who had called her beautiful. And then she looked at the hunter who had traveled across galaxies to, apparently, kneel at her feet. "I'm not a leader," she said. "No," the hunter replied, its scarred face breaking into what might have been a smile. "You're better than that. You're the proof that we don't need leaders anymore." The hunter who'd come in peace was named Zara. When she took on a human form, really concentrated, she could shrink herself down to a mere 8 feet tall. Standing next to Margaret and Walter's tiny kitchen, they looked like a pair of impossible, wrong-sized sisters. The coffee got cold on the table as the entire world shifted on its axis. "There are 47 of us," Zara said, her voice still learning the shape of English words, giving them a strange, melodic cadence. hidden on this planet, scattered, ashamed of what we were. Your mother helped us escape before she was killed. She gave us coordinates to these safe houses. She gave us human names. Margaret poured more coffee with hands that could crush the ceramic pot into dust without trying. Careful. She had to be so careful now, always. Why didn't you help her when the other hunters came for her, the final time? We were cowards, Zara said, her gaze unflinching. There is no excuse, no justification. It is simply the truth. We thought if we stayed quiet, stayed hidden, the great hunt would eventually forget about us. Zara's strange, multifaceted eyes went bright. But you fought them out in the open. You killed them with your bare hands. You proved to the universe that they could bleed. They've always been able to bleed, Walter grumbled from his corner, cleaning his rifle. They just made everyone forget it was possible. The young man from the crowd was still there. He had followed them inside, a silent, watchful shadow. His name was James, the banker's son. He had soft hands that had never held anything heavier than a pen. "Why are you still here, boy?" Walter asked, his tone not unkind. James didn't look at Walter. His eyes were fixed on Margaret. He wasn't looking at her size, or her strength, or the strange marks that still glowed with a faint, silvery light under her skin. He was just looking at her. "Because I think I'm like you," he said quietly. Everyone in the room turned to stare at him. Not like that," he stammered, pulling up the sleeve of his clean, crisp shirt. There were scars on his forearm, not from an accident, but precise, deliberate lines, as if he'd been counting something. "When I was 12, a woman came through town. She was tall as a house and she was dying. She touched me, right here." He pointed to the center of his chest. "She said I had the right kind of heart. Then she died right there in the street. But ever since that day, I've been changing." Margaret stood up so fast the heavy oak table cracked down the middle. "Show me." James closed his eyes. His body didn't grow like Margaret's did. It did something else, something far stranger. He became more real, more solid. It was as if everything else in the room, the furniture, the people, the very air, had become a faint shadow, and he was the only thing casting it. The air around him seemed to bend. The light from the lamp moved wrong, warping as it passed him. "Density," Zara whispered in awe. "He is increasing his molecular density. That's—" She looked at Margaret, her eyes wide with disbelief. "That is a royal trait. Only the pure bloods of the ruling caste can do that." "But I'm not," James said, opening his eyes. The effect vanished. The house stopped creaking under the sudden, immense strain. "I'm human. I was born right here in this town. My parents are both from Ohio." And then Margaret understood. It was a revelation that hit her like a physical blow. Her mother hadn't just been hiding refugees. She had been planting seeds. She had been traveling, in her last days, touching certain humans, giving them just enough of her alien essence to change them, to prepare them. For what, she didn't know. But she was starting to guess. "How many others?" she asked James, her voice a hush. "I don't know, but sometimes, in a crowd, at the market, I can feel them, the other changed ones, the infected ones, whatever we are." He let his sleeve fall back down. "We've all been waiting for something. We just didn't know what it was. I think it was you." Walter let out a laugh, a sharp, bitter sound. "An army. That clever, magnificent woman. She built a goddamn army right under their noses." "Not an army," Zara corrected softly. "A species. A new species. Not human. Not our kind. Something in between. Something better." Margaret walked outside, into the cool desert night. The others followed her out onto the porch. The sun was long gone, and the sky was a black velvet blanket scattered with a billion diamond chips. She could feel them now. All of them. The hidden refugees like Zara, the changed humans like James, the bridge people. They were like little lights, scattered all across the planet. And they were waking up. Their borrowed power, their hidden marks, were burning bright, calling out to hers across the miles. "They'll come back," she said, her voice full of certainty. "The hunters. They'll come back with weapons this time, with ships, with an entire fleet." "Yes," Zara agreed, standing beside her, a fellow giant in the darkness. "They will try to burn this entire world to glass rather than let us exist." "Good," Margaret said, and she turned to face them. Walter, old and human, and so incredibly brave. Zara, alien and lost and full of a fragile, newfound hope. James, young and changed and ready for a purpose. "Let them come." "Margaret," Walter warned, "you can't fight a whole civilization." "No," she agreed, "but I can give them a choice." She looked at Zara. "Can you contact the others? The 47? "Yes, there is a way. Tell them to stop hiding. Tell them it's time. Tell them to find the touched humans, the ones like James. They need to be taught, trained, prepared. For a war or for a new way of life. We have to be ready for both." She turned her gaze on James. "The hunters think in terms of pure and impure. But nature doesn't work that way. Nature mixes. Nature combines. Nature evolves." She locked eyes with the young man. "How many people in this little town have scars like yours? How many were touched?" James thought for a moment. "Maybe a dozen. Maybe more. People who got sick and then suddenly got better. People who survived things they shouldn't have." "Then we start here," Margaret declared. "Tonight." She turned to the old rancher who had been her silent guardian for so long. "Walter, I need you to do something for me. Anything, girl, you name it. I need you to write down everything. Everything my mother taught you. Every word you can remember of that language that hurts. Every weakness she ever mentioned. Every story she told you about the old wars, about their technology, their leaders, their beliefs." "That'll take time," he said. "Then you better start now." As if summoned by the gravity of the moment, old Agnes appeared in the doorway of the ranch house. The tiny woman had walked all the way back from town, her cane leaving a determined, shuffling track in the dust. "Heard you're starting something." "Agnes, this isn't—" Walter began. "Shut up, Walter," she snapped, not taking her eyes off Margaret. She hobbled over to the giantess. "My grandnephew, the one you saved from the river. He's been different since that day, stronger. He sees things in the dark. He dreams in languages we don't have words for." She straightened her bent spine as much as her old body would allow. "His mother thinks he's possessed by a demon, wants to send him away to the asylum, but I know better now. He's like you, isn't he? He was touched by something bigger." Margaret knelt, a mountain coming down to the level of a weathered old stone, bringing herself face to face with the woman. "Yes. Then you'll teach him. You'll protect him. I'll try." "Don't try," Agnes said, and she poked Margaret in the chest with the end of her cane. It was like poking a granite cliff face, but Margaret felt it anyway, a sharp point of fierce, human expectation. "Do. This town is dying. It's been dying since the silver ran out and the railroad passed us by. Maybe what we need is something new. Maybe we need to be something new." And then more people started coming. Word had spread. It wasn't an angry mob this time. It was families. Frightened parents bringing their changed children. Husbands and wives bringing their touched relatives. The ones who had been hiding in plain sight, concealing what they were becoming for fear of being called freaks or monsters. A young girl who could see through walls. A boy whose tears could heal cuts and mend bruises. A quiet woman whose singing voice could shatter glass or soothe a fever, depending on the pitch. They came scared, hopeful, and desperate, drawn to the impossible woman on the old rancher's porch. Margaret looked at them all, at this strange new tribe of human and almost human and barely human anymore. She thought of her mother, dying alone in a crashed ship, believing in a future she would never get to see. She thought of her father, a simple human man loving someone impossible, because love itself is impossible, and that's what makes it perfect. "I can't promise you that you'll be safe," she told the gathered crowd, her voice carrying over them like a warm blanket. "I can't promise you that we'll win. I can only promise you this: you won't be alone anymore. Whatever comes for us next, we will face it together." The sheriff arrived then. He had taken off his badge. His gun was left behind. "My son," he said simply, his voice thick with shame and hope. "He's been growing like you. My wife thinks it's the devil's work, but I think maybe it's God trying something new." Margaret stood. The crowd had grown to nearly 50 people, 50 souls caught between two worlds, 50 bridges waiting to be built. 3 days, she announced, her voice ringing with a power that had nothing to do with her size. "The signal you sent," she looked to Zara, "will reach them in 3 days. The hunters will come. They'll come with everything they have, and we will be ready. We will show them what we have become." "What have we become?" someone in the crowd asked, their voice trembling. Margaret thought of her mother's words, written in that old journal, words about choice, about love, about the impossible becoming possible. "Free," she said. "We've become free." That night, nobody slept. Zara, the reformed hunter, taught them words of power, words that human throats were never meant to speak, but now could. Margaret showed them how to read the faint, silvery marks that were beginning to appear on their own skin, a shared language written in light. Walter sat at the kitchen table, writing until his hands cramped, documenting every scrap of knowledge he could remember. And James, the banker's son, sat beside Margaret on the porch steps, watching the stars. "You know, we're probably all going to die," he said, his voice surprisingly calm. "Probably," she agreed. "So why do I feel so alive? More alive than I ever have before." She looked at him, this soft boy with his banker's hands and his impossible, reality-bending density. "Because for the first time in your life, you're not pretending to be less than what you are." Is that what we were all doing? Pretending? "That's what everything does," she said, a deep, ancient wisdom in her voice. "Until it can't anymore. Then it either breaks and dies, or it evolves." "Which one are we doing?" he asked. Margaret stood up and stretched, her massive frame creaking like ancient trees in a strong wind. "Both," she said. "We're dying as one thing and being born as another." 3 days later they came. The sky turned black with their ships. Not just a few hunters this time, but hundreds of them. Warriors in black armor who had burned entire worlds for the crime of impurity. But on the ground, Margaret stood ready. Behind her were 63 changed humans from the small desert town. Beside her stood Zara and her 47 refugees, no longer hiding. And in her heart, she held her mother's last, greatest gift. Not just the knowledge of how to fight, but the wisdom to know when not to. The lead hunter, the supreme pursuer, descended from the flagship. It was ancient, powerful, and perfect in its terrible, unwavering purpose. "You have corrupted this world." Its voice boomed in their minds. "You have poisoned the bloodline. You have broken the oldest laws." "Yes," Margaret said simply, her own voice clear and strong in the sudden silence. "And we are going to break some more. Then you will die." "Maybe," she replied, "but we will die as ourselves, not as your shadows, not as your secret shame, and not as your fear of what we might become." She took a single step forward. The ground cracked under her foot. Her marks blazed with white-hot light. And behind her, every touched human, every refugee, every single bridge person, blazed with her. A constellation of defiance on the desert floor. "You came here to kill us," she said. But I am going to give you a choice. Leave now and never return. Or stay and see what evolution really looks like. The hunter laughed, a sound that grated on the soul. You think you can threaten us? We are millions. You are dozens. You're right, Margaret said, and she smiled. It was her mother's smile. It was her father's smile. We are dozens today, but we'll be hundreds tomorrow and thousands in a year. She looked past the hunter, at the thousands of warriors watching from their ships. Because love is contagious, change is contagious, and you can't kill an idea whose time has come. The hunter raised its weapon, a blade of pure, dark energy. Margaret raised her hand, and then James stepped forward, his body warping the light around him. And Agnes's grandnephew stepped forward, his eyes seeing through dimensions the hunters couldn't even perceive. The girl with the healing tears, and the woman with the voice that could mend bones, and Zara with her royal blood, and Walter with his rifle loaded with bullets blessed by words that shouldn't exist. They all stood together, human and inhuman, and everything new in between. And for the first time in 100,000 years, the supreme pursuer hesitated. That hesitation was the beginning of the end of the old world and the very first breath of the new one. Margaret looked directly at you. Yes, you. The one listening to this story right now. The one who knows what it's like to feel different, to feel like you're too much, or not enough. The one who feels caught between worlds. This isn't just their story, she said, her voice echoing not in the desert, but in your own heart. It's your story too. Because everyone is a bridge. Everyone is connecting two things that weren't connected before. Everyone is impossible, until they're not. The battle that followed, that's another story for another time. A story of fire and starlight, of impossible victories and necessary losses. But the war, the real war, was won right here. It started here, with a choice, with a girl who was too big for her world deciding to make the world bigger instead of making herself smaller. It started with the simple, universe-shattering idea that love could be stronger than blood. It started with you, listening to this, and knowing that you're a part of this too. If this story touched something in you, if it made you feel a little less alone in your own beautiful, impossible difference, then do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. Ring that notification bell so you never miss another story about the impossible becoming possible. And tell us in the comments below, where are you watching from? What bridge are you building between your worlds? What impossible thing are you in the process of becoming? Remember, we are all Margaret Sullivan. We're all a little too much and not quite enough. We are all caught between what we were and what we are becoming, and that is exactly where we need to be.